Mr. Speaker, accurate, trusted information is more important than ever in this public health crisis. The Cross-Whitehall Counter-Disinformation Unit is providing a comprehensive picture of disinformation and misinformation on coronavirus. I have also engaged personally with social media platforms who have made technical and policy changes to stem the spread of misinformation. For example, YouTube now removes content that denies the existence of COVID-19 or contradicts NHS information, and WhatsApp has reduced the number of contacts a message can be forwarded to.
Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sadly, public trust in the media is collapsing, with many elements seemingly more interested in catching politicians out and creating a story rather than reporting the news. What further work can my right honourable friend and his department do to work with the media to provide useful and accurate information to the public regarding support for vulnerable people and struggling businesses as we continue to tackle this crisis?
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. At this time, we actually need trusted information more than ever. And whilst, of course, we all know that the media doesn't always get it right, I do pay tribute to the work of the news industry in providing much-needed information. And we see this work in our national and local newspapers and in our local commercial and BBC radio stations, who bring together communities and provide reliable news. And it's for this reason that we have designated people who work in the production and distribution of news as key workers. We are also addressing the keyword blocking that undermines the advertising revenue the sector so relies on, as well as ensuring that government directly communicates its messages through advertising.
We now have Dame Cheryl Gillen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many social media platforms are being used to spread disinformation and vitriol, which particularly at this time is dangerous to our communities and individuals. What assessment has the Minister made of the industry's initiatives to warn people about this misinformation and their willingness to remove destabilising and abusive messages?
Secretary of State.
Well, we have seen positive steps taken by most platforms to curtail the spread of harmful and misleading narratives related to COVID-19. However, I did make clear when I spoke to the platforms earlier this month, they do need to explore how they can further limit the spread of misinformation on their platforms. And in my meeting, platforms agreed to exactly the sort of initiatives my right honourable friend correctly mentions, and to increase messaging to users about how to identify and respond to misinformation. And since then, Facebook has announced that the platform will be showing messages in the newsfeed to anyone who has interacted with a post that has since been removed. Now, this sort of work needs to continue at pace across all platforms.
Julian Knight.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Some of the most pernicious pieces of disinformation, such as 5G and the, let's be frank about the lie about the government's fake NHS accounts, have been amplified by blue-tick verified users on Twitter. Will the Secretary of State join me in calling on Twitter to be much more robust and remove verified status from even prominent users should they be found spreading fake news and disinformation?
State.
Well, my honourable friend, as always, is absolutely right. And at that round table, I was clear that those platforms need to go further and faster to drown out disinformation and help spread vital public health messaging to stay at home. And on the specific question of Twitter, and all platforms, I've encouraged them to explore all the ways they can further limit the misinformation on their platform. Now, that clearly means enforcing their own rules, which of course Twitter can do in removing verified status. And I can assure my honourable friend I will be watching his select committee discussion with the platforms later with great interest.
Facebook is to begin sending alerts to people who have previously interacted with pages containing misinformation about coronavirus. The message, encouraging them to promote trusted sites like the World Health Organization, is expected to appear in users' news feeds in the next few weeks. Let's speak to our correspondent, Roland Manthorpe now. Hello to you, Roland. So how would this work?
Well, there's no doubt that Facebook has been doing an awful lot to try and tackle misinformation on its platform. But there's also no doubt that misinformation continues to go viral, or what we used to call going viral. I'm not sure what the new term is. Anyway, there's lots of it out there. And now Facebook has done something new and something which, as far as I'm aware, and I've been studying this for quite a long time, they've never done before. In the next few weeks, anyone who's liked, reacted or commented on a piece of harmful misinformation that Facebook has definitely identified as such will see a post in their newsfeed, this one. Help friends and family avoid false information about COVID-19. You will be getting this if you've engaged with any post that has been checked by the fact checkers that Facebook uses to check misinformation. Now, you'll notice something about this post. It doesn't actually say, hey, you've been kind of responding to misinformation. Hey, you might have got something wrong. It doesn't tell you which piece of misinformation you might have responded to. And this is really interesting because campaigners have been calling for something much stronger. And in fact, the campaign group of VARs who have been on this for ages, they've really led the campaign on this, and they mocked up this. This is what they wanted Facebook to do, something much stronger. Look at the top. It seems like you've been recently shown factually incorrect information. That the wording there is really important. Not just that you've reacted or commented or liked, you've been shown, if you've even just seen a piece of factually incorrect information, then a VARs would like you to have seen that post, which is a really strong message. Hey, you've seen this, it's wrong. This is the correction now, and this is why. Whereas Facebook, they're just saying in a sort of slightly passive-aggressive way, here's you might want to share this with your friends and family, and linking to a list of common rumours that the WHO have put together. And I think that what we're seeing here is just how difficult this is. There's been a long debate in this area about whether corrections work. I mean, if you think about it in a social setting, if you were kind of talking with your friends and maybe you kind of said something that was a bit of a false rumour, and then out of the blue, someone jumped in and said, hey, that's wrong, correct it immediately, and gave you a whole great big kind of document that you had to read. I mean, you'd find it quite annoying. You might even find it inflaming. You might even start a debate in the comments, or, you know, kind of a debate in the pub, as it were, about exactly about this piece of information. And you can see how difficult this is. And Facebook is treading a very fine line. Some people want them to go further, but even so, this is a significant step.
But along with verifiable news comes a lot of misleading information, from fake health advice to speculation about government action. Some information may be being spread by people who mean well, but are nevertheless wrong. Zainab Badawi has these tips to make sure you know the facts you're getting are reliable.
In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, passing on information can feel like one way we can support our families and friends.
Here at the BBC, we are working very hard to make sure that everything we broadcast and publish is accurate and up to date. But there is a whole load of information out there that isn't.
And misinformation can spread fast. If a message is sent to a WhatsApp group of 20, then each of them shares it with 20 other people, and this happens 5 times, it can reach more than 3 million people very quickly. Untruths can take many forms. One of the most common we're seeing is copied and pasted messages being passed around on WhatsApp or in Facebook groups containing bad advice or fake cures. And because these are shared by a friend or trusted source, it's not obvious who wrote these messages in the first place. Often they're attributed to a vague source like a friend's friend who's a doctor, soldier, or works for the government. For example, a voice note has been spreading on WhatsApp. In it, a woman is translating advice from a colleague who has a friend working at a hospital on the Spanish island of Gran Canaria. Some of the tips are helpful, such as washing surfaces thoroughly. But the voice memo includes misleading advice as well. The speaker suggests sunlight neutralizes the virus, and that coronavirus can be killed by taking a sip of warm water every 20 minutes. There is no scientific basis for either of these claims.
If you're not sure the whole post is true, it might do more harm than good to share it. And if the source isn't easily identifiable or the story hasn't been reported elsewhere, then it really is worth being skeptical about it.
Pictures taken out of context can also be really misleading. A video from Italy was posted on Twitter showing military vehicles on the streets. There were rumours they were responding to coronavirus riots. In fact, they were returning from routine exercises that had nothing to do with the outbreak. Some of us may share information with our friends as a joke or to lighten their mood. But even if they don't take it seriously, others might. For example, a claim that lions were released in Russia to patrol the streets was taken seriously by some. It was not true. We all want to share news that we think will help others, but before you do, follow these steps. Has the story been reported anywhere else? Is it from a reliable source? Has the photo or image been taken out of context? If you're not sure, then maybe it's fake. And you can stop that information from doing harm by not sharing it any further.
If you want to check medical advice, go on the World Health Organization website. And if you feel that a story isn't real, you can always look to a reliable source like the BBC.
You've been very firm saying that you're following the scientific advice and talking about what scientists have been telling you. So why won't you publish that scientific advice and even just the names of the scientists who are giving you the advice? It's interesting saying that I'm saying that you're not being transparent. You were saying a bit earlier that if you did one thing, then journalists would criticise you. And look, I'll level you with you. You know, the poll out by Sky News last week showed that people trust politicians like you a lot more than journalists like me when it comes to these dealing with the coronavirus epidemic. But at the same time, you know, my job is to try and get answers. And it does feel like on some things, we're not really sure what those answers are. You know, we don't know what the plan is or what the thinking is around the lockdown exit. We don't know who's on the committee of scientists. We don't get that scientific advice until it's slightly delayed. You know, you can't blame us for asking these questions. And it does feel as if there are some things that you're not telling us. Why not? Now, there's been a lot of criticism, of course, well-documented criticism, saying the government was too slow to get testing up and running in the previous months.
The government's Scientific Advisory Group on Emergencies recommended an urgent lockdown to save lives on the 26th of February, but it took another 3.5 weeks to implement it. The government likes to claim that it has been following the scientific advice, but it hasn't, has it?
Time. The key message that I think everybody needs to hear, repetitive though it may be, the best way we can help the NHS and help ourselves to stop the spread of the illness is to wash our hands and do that. You know, it's 20 seconds, that's 2 times happy birthday, I'm told, with hot water and soap, and wash your hands. It is still the case that the single most useful thing that we can all do to support our NHS to stop the spread of coronavirus is to wash our hands. 2 times happy birthday, hot water and soap. For the moment, things are as they have been, and you know I'm going to say this, the best single thing we can do is wash our hands, 2 verses of the national anthem or happy birthday, hot water, bar of soap. I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. Hi folks, I want to bring you up to speed with something that's happening today, which is that I've developed mild symptoms of the coronavirus. That's to say, a temperature and a persistent cough. And on the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, I've taken a test. That has come out positive, so I am working from home, I'm self-isolating, and that's entirely the right thing to do. It's a quick update from me on the campaign against coronavirus. First of all, in my own case, although I'm feeling better and I've done my 7 days of isolation, alas, I still have one of the symptoms, a minor symptom of I still have a temperature, and so in accordance with government advice, I must continue my self-isolation until that symptom itself goes.
The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been admitted to intensive care with those persistent symptoms
of coronavirus.
Good afternoon. I've today left hospital after a week in which the NHS has saved my life, no question. It's hard to find words to express my debt, but before I come to that, I want to thank everyone in the entire UK for the effort and the sacrifice you have made and are making. When the sun is out and the kids are at home, when the whole natural world seems at its loveliest and the outdoors is so inviting, I can only imagine how tough it has been to follow the rules on social distancing. I thank you because so many millions and millions of people across this country have been doing the right thing. Millions going through the hardship of self-isolation, faithfully, patiently, and with thought and care for others as well as for themselves. I want you to know that this Easter Sunday, I do believe that your efforts are worth it and are daily proving their worth. Because although we mourn every day those who are taken from us in such numbers, and though the struggle is by no means over, we are now making progress in this incredible national battle against coronavirus. A fight we never picked against an enemy we still don't entirely understand. We're making progress in this national battle because the British public formed a human shield around this country's greatest national asset, our National Health Service. We understood and we decided that if together we could keep our NHS safe, if we could stop our NHS from being overwhelmed, then we could not be beaten, and this country would rise together and overcome this challenge as we have overcome so many challenges in the past. In the last 7 days, I have, of course, seen the pressure that the NHS is under. I've seen the personal courage, not just of the doctors and nurses, but of everyone, the cleaners, the cooks, the healthcare workers of every description, physios, radiographers, pharmacists, who have kept coming to work, kept putting themselves in harm's way, kept risking this deadly virus. It is thanks to that courage, that devotion, that duty, and that love that our NHS has been unbeatable. I want to pay my own thanks to the utterly brilliant doctors, leaders in their fields, men and women, but several of them for some reason called Nick, who took some crucial decisions a few days ago, for which I will be grateful for the rest of my life. I want to thank the many nurses, men and women, whose care has been so astonishing. I'm going to forget some names, so please forgive me, but I want to thank Poling and Shannon and Emily and Angel and Connie and Becky and Rachel and Nikki and Anne. And I hope they won't mind if I mention in particular 2 nurses who stood by my bedside for 48 hours when things could have gone either way. They're Jenny from New Zealand, Invercargill on the South Island to be exact, and Luis from Portugal near Porto. And the reason in the end my body did start to get enough oxygen was because for every second of the night, they were watching and they were thinking and they were caring and making the interventions I needed. So that is how I also know that across this country, 24 hours a day, for every second of every hour, there are hundreds of thousands of NHS staff who are acting with the same care and thought and precision as Jenny and Luis. That is why we will defeat this coronavirus and defeat it together. We will win because our NHS is the beating heart of this country. It is the best of this country. It is unconquerable. It is powered by love. So, thank you from me, from all of us, to the NHS. And let's remember to follow the rules on social distancing, stay at home, protect our NHS, and save lives. Thank you, and happy Easter.
Well, the knives are out for Britain's Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He hasn't even fully recovered from a nasty dose of the virus and a life-saving stay in one of our top hospitals. But already, his government's iron grip on the country is starting to loosen. Awkward questions are being asked. Did the British government just watch and do very little as the virus took hold here? Specifically, why was Boris Johnson on vacation in February at his country residence with his pregnant fiancée, instead of chairing crucial meetings of the country's Emergency Virus Committee? Why is there now a dangerous shortage of protective clothing for our doctors and nurses, a shortage that puts their lives at risk? And why does Britain still not have enough testing kits to evaluate the spread of the disease? Accounts are now emerging of Boris Johnson's complacency, while the experts desperately tried to get him to focus on the virus. This is the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and some here feel that he's being set up as the fall guy in the inevitable public inquiry that will be held when all this is over. But the buck surely stops with the man at number 10 Downing Street. Throughout his life, Boris Johnson has made it through tough times by playing it for laughs. To start with, nobody criticised his handling of the virus. It just didn't seem fair or patriotic to challenge him in the middle of a crisis. But now, with more than 17,000 people dead, the mood is changing, and the questions are pretty simple. Is Boris Johnson really the right person to deal with this appalling set of circumstances? And if he isn't, who is? That's London Calling from CBS News. I'm Simon Bates in Devon.
Good morning. I'm sorry I've been away from my desk for much longer than I would have liked, and I want to thank everybody who has stepped up, in particular the First Secretary of State, Dominic Raab, who's done a terrific job. But once again, I want to thank you, the people of this country, for the sheer grit and guts you've shown and are continuing to show. Every day, I know that this virus brings new sadness and mourning to households across the land. And it is still true that this is the biggest single challenge this country has faced since the war. And I in no way minimize the continuing problems we face. And yet it is also true that we are making progress with fewer hospital admissions, fewer COVID patients in ICU, and real signs now that we are passing through the peak. And thanks to your forbearance, your good sense, your altruism, your spirit of community, thanks to our collective national resolve, we are on the brink of achieving that first clear mission to prevent our National Health Service from being overwhelmed in a way that tragically we have seen elsewhere. And that is how and why we are now beginning to turn the tide. If this virus were a physical assailant, an unexpected and invisible mugger, which I can tell you from personal experience it is, then this is the moment when we have begun together to wrestle it to the floor. And so it follows that this is the moment of opportunity. This is the moment when we can press home our advantage. It is also the moment of maximum risk, because I know there will be many people looking now at our apparent success and beginning to wonder whether now is the time to go easy on those social distancing measures. And I know how hard and how stressful it has been to give up, even temporarily, those ancient and basic freedoms, not seeing friends, not seeing loved ones, working from home, managing the kids, worrying about your job and your firm. So let me say directly also to British business, to the shopkeepers, to the entrepreneurs, to the hospitality sector, to everyone on whom our economy depends. I understand your impatience, I share your anxiety, and I know that without our private sector, without the drive and commitment of the wealth creators of this country, there will be no economy to speak of. There will be no cash to pay for our public services, no way of funding our NHS. And yes, I can see the long-term consequences of lockdown as clearly as anyone. And so yes, I entirely share your urgency. It's the government's urgency. And yet we must also recognise the risk of a second spike, the risk of losing control of that virus and letting the reproduction rate go back over 1. Because that would mean not only a new wave of death and disease, but also an economic disaster. And we would be forced once again to slam on the brakes across the whole country and the whole economy, and reimpose restrictions in such a way as to do more and lasting damage. And so I know it is tough, and I want to get this economy moving as fast as I can, but I refuse to throw away all the effort and the sacrifice of the British people, and to risk a second major outbreak and huge loss of life and the overwhelming of the NHS. And I ask you to contain your impatience, because I believe we are coming now to the end of the first phase of this conflict. And in spite of all the suffering, we have so nearly succeeded. We defied so many predictions. We did not run out of ventilators or ICU beds. We did not allow our NHS to collapse. And on the contrary, we have so far collectively shielded our NHS so that our incredible doctors and nurses and healthcare staff have been able to shield all of us from an outbreak that would have been far worse. And we collectively flattened the peak. And so when we're sure that this first phase is over and that we're meeting our 5 tests, deaths falling, NHS protected, rate of infection down, really sorting out the challenges of testing and PPE, avoiding a second peak, then that will be the time to move on to the second phase, in which we continue to suppress the disease and keep the reproduction rate, the R rate, down, but begin gradually to refine the economic and social restrictions, and one by one to fire up the engines of this vast UK economy. And in that process, difficult judgments will be made. And we simply cannot spell out now how fast or slow or even when those changes will be made, though clearly the government will be saying much more about this in the coming days. And I want to serve notice now that these decisions will be taken with the maximum possible transparency. And I want to share all our working and our thinking, my thinking, with you, the British people. And of course, we will be relying, as ever, on the science to inform us, as we have from the beginning. But we will also be reaching out to build the biggest possible consensus across business, across industry, across all parts of our United Kingdom, across party lines, bringing in opposition parties as far as we possibly can, because I think that's no less than what the British people would expect. And I can tell you now that preparations are underway and have been for weeks to allow us to win phase 2 of this fight, as I believe we are now on track to prevail in phase 1. And so I say to you finally, if you can keep going in the way that you have kept going so far, if you can help protect our NHS to save lives, And if we as a country can show the same spirit of optimism and energy shown by Captain Tom Moore, who turns 100 this week, if we can show the same spirit of unity and determination as we've all shown in the past 6 weeks, then I have absolutely no doubt that we will beat it together. We will come through this all the faster, and the United Kingdom will emerge stronger than ever before. Thank you all very much.